So meet the new boss. He's the same as the old boss, except not as smart and not as good. Well, that's sort of what the United States has done this year, this week, or this morning, having named Dave Sarachan. And at first thought it was Gordon Strachan, but it was not to be. The name Dave Sarachan is the temporary interim replacement for Bruce Arena. And of course, considering how Dave Sarachan has coached in MLS and how Bruce Arena has coached in MLS, they might as well keep Bruce Arena. I mean, they had matches coming up. They knew that it makes no difference who's coaching. They're just probably going to be disorganized and discombobulated, and Michael Bradley is going to play 90 minutes again. But the bigger question is, what does U.S. want? Now, this is one of those situations in the grand scheme because, you know, a major football coach, somebody who's going to be coaching the United States men's national team, can be a pretty good coach. In other words, if they're going to pay Klinsmann money of about $3 million a year, they have the ability to find someone reasonably experienced and reasonably successful over his years of coaching experience. Now, the candidates that have so far been placed out there, you know, and there are various odds giving for this coach or that coach, is it so Laurent Blanc, who was a great French central defender, captain, and coached French national team in Paris Saint-Germain, is one of the candidates. And to me, Blanc hadn't had any sort of a super successful experience because he took over already very talented PSG team and already very talented French team and kind of didn't do much with it. I mean, you know, he was there. They didn't look horrible. So on one hand, you have to say, well, you know, he didn't crap his pants. But on the other hand, he's not like a brilliant guy. Another is Sam Allardyce, who of course had some pretty successful club experience, especially with clubs with fairly inferior level of talent. When he was with Bolton, they weren't very good. And he mastered in saving horribly ran clubs, or at least the clubs were horribly run before he took over. And he was able to save them from relegation. It was true with Sunderland. It was true with Crystal Palace. And additionally, something that speaks in his favor is that when he was fired at Newcastle and Blackburn, it resulted in Newcastle and Blackburn going down. Now Blackburn is in third division. I mean, Newcastle was smart enough to hire Rafa Benitez, who brought him back out. And now we'll go into kind of a great general concept. Who should the United States want? Well, my first qualification is that it cannot hire anybody from MLS unless it's Gerardo Tata Martino, because Martino has had successful international experience with Paraguay and some experience with Argentina, which was pretty good. And he coached Barcelona, where he didn't crap his pants, but once again, he didn't achieve fantastic results, as the talent suggests. Now, to me, Martino is sort of a Roy Hodgson type, somebody who's very good, or let's put Sam Allardyce in the same group, someone who's very good in taking a less talented team, putting together some sort of a team concept, putting the right ideas together, make sure everyone is on the same page, but not necessarily, you know, doing great things going forward. But that's enough. What they do, you know, sort of defend well, rely on set pieces, and play crappy quality ball. But that suffices. At least it suffices for Allardyce, or it sufficed for Gerardo Martino when he was with Paraguay. When Martino and Roy Hodgson and even Sam Allardyce took over teams at the very top of their reasonable local level echelon. In other words, they took over talented rosters. In case of Sam Allardyce, it was a talented roster in the championship. They really didn't do all that well. In other words, they didn't go balls to the wall. They didn't go all into attack as their talent allowed them to do. They sort of, you know, weaseled in a bit, inch by inch. They stayed in the game. They stayed in the play. They won the playoffs. And, you know, and that was their key to success. Organization, determination, hard work. And that seemed to fit the United States pretty well, except when they go out and play under Bruce Arena at Trinidad and Tobago, and they suck. and they don't play hard. They're not organized, they're not smart, they're not intelligent, they're not hardworking. But let's bring up once again the general scheme. Do they want what essentially is a B-class manager, somebody who, is good enough to keep their heads above water? Do they want someone better? Now, when Klinsmann came from Orange County, he drove like 20 miles, But when Klinsmann came to the United States, he promised all sort of great things, and of course it didn't happen. One is, to quote Clint Eastwood and quoting his screenwriters, every man has to know his limitations. Klinsmann clearly was far more optimistic than his limitation should have told him to be. Nonetheless, what would happen if the United States went under? Well, that would be bad for all of us. What if they went after somebody who is an up-and-coming coach, somebody who had some success, maybe didn't get along with his management? Some coaches resign sometimes for this very reason. And what you hear from Sunil Gulati and kind of very limited PR releases is that they're not going to hire a coach right now. They're going to negotiate. Are going to look at candidates, and they may even have to wait until the World Cup. Now, that immediately smacks of complete imbecility to me. Why? Well, if you look at the 32 teams coming to World Cup, and of course the suggestion is the United States will wait until the World Cup is over and then hire whoever is no longer coaching his previous team. Well, first of all, if a coach is successful, then he'll be wanted by bigger clubs who can pay bigger money, and he's probably not going to want to tie his career with the United States. Now, so obviously they're not going to get Yogi Löw, they're not going to get Didier Deschamps, they're not going to get that guy Lopetegui from Spain. So who are they going to get? Well, they may get some of the lower tier European coaches who may be coaching in Europe or in Japan, like, what's his name? Not Handanovic, Halihodzic, who's in Japan, or some guys like Hector Cooper, who's coaching in Egypt, in Egypt. That's one of those prerequisites for the job. You have to be in Egypt to coach Egypt. But, if you take sort of this 32 prospective teams and you break it down by categories, the United States isn't going to get a top coach, because top coach is going to be in demand in Europe, most likely in demand with the same teams, with the same nations, the same countries, the same federations who have hired him in the first place. It'll also make no sense to sign some of those coaches who are going to who are going to have to resign because their teams poop in their pants. And always going to be some teams like Bruce Arena in 2006 who resign after pooping in his pants. Nonetheless, he was rehired a decade later because, of course, he's gotten so much better at the age of 64, whatever he is. So you take out the whole the very bottom, and you take out the very top. And then who are the remaining candidates? Well, you might have, somebody coaching Denmark, or somebody coaching, a reasonable mid-table team in Europe, maybe a Croatian guy, although they just replaced somebody. Switzerland they're not going to get. So they kind of suck. I don't think most of the candidates that are in those middle-of-the-pack clubs are going to want to go to the United States unless the United States is really going to blow them out of the water with a financial offer. In other words, give somebody $5 million a year. Now, the United States can't afford a $5 million a year salary, since they're pretty much paying close to that to the coaches that are no longer working for them. But nonetheless, it's a pretty serious investment. One of the reasons, because a lot of these coaches will be tempted to go to a different club or a different national team if their early results don't turn out favorably. In other words, they have to play young kids, MLS kids, or some kids who just go over to Europe, and the results aren't there, and the coach says, what, screw it, why did I get into this mess? They'll spend a year or two, they'll get their $5 to $10 million, and they'll say, what, for the World Cup, I'm leaving. And that happens to somebody like Marcelo Bielsa, who, could go to a club, look at the club and say, I'm going to stay here until I want to stay here. And, if they could hire Bielsa, I suppose, because he's not doing very well at Lille. But he could easily leave. And that leaves him, with somebody once again, interim. And interim is probably going to be crap, which is a problem. And the second problem is, when you interview names, what are you interviewing? What are you basing everything upon? What is your decision based on? Now, in my opinion, if I were interviewing somebody for a $3 million a year job, I would only interview a resume. Forget the interview itself. A guy could be jovial, fun, engaging, and entertaining. He also may not be a great coach. When Bob Bradley was hired at Swansea, the American owner said, well, he impressed me with his interview. Well, if you didn't read his resume, I'm sure the interview would have been fantastic. The problem is Bob really, crapped out. I use the word often, but it's reasonably effective instead of saying the S word. So Bob crapped out at Egypt, where he lost to Congo, which is like 130th ranked nation on a home and away basis, and then he got destroyed by Ghana. So Bob loses 6-1 at Ghana when he was coaching Egypt, and that's good enough to get him hired with Swansea. Now, fortunately for those owners, they kind of quickly realized that they stepped into something extremely smelly, and they got rid of Bob. And it cost them some money, but that's no big deal for them. The problem is, if United States steps into the same pile, it's going to cost them another World Cup. And I hope they don't do it again.